Good evening from Wolfville and Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. It is just days before September 30th, a day being observed nationally as a time to reflect on and raise awareness of the tragedies experienced by Indigenous people because of the country's former residential school system. On Thursday, please take some time to consider your role in reconciliation. My name is Una Proudfoot, and I am the Executive Director of Alumni Affairs in the Office of Advancement at Acadia. It's been a month since our last virtual event, and we've been busy here in Wolfville and on the Acadia campus, transitioning back to our workspaces, and more importantly, transitioning our students back to in-person learning. We're delighted to begin to see the campus come alive again. And I say begin as we are taking it slowly, cautiously, and with complete regard for all of whom share our space. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. I have already mentioned about microphones and videos, so please mute your microphones and disable your video cameras during the presentation. After the presentation, we certainly do welcome questions, and you can do that by engaging your video camera and or engaging your microphone. But you can also write it in the chat function if you'd rather not be auditory or visual. So please write it in the chat function. I'll keep an eye on the chat function and ask your questions for you if that's your preference. We have entered all of your names into a draw, and we will announce a winner at the end of the presentation and discussion, and we'll send you out either an Acadia swag package, or we actually also have some books from the Casey Irving production that we have secured and we'll use as our prizes in the next few events. So on to our program, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. It is a pleasure to be here this evening with our guest, Dr. Catherine Morley, who is a professor in the School of Nutrition and Dietetics at Acadia and has already had a bit of a chat with one of her former students, and an adjunct professor in applied human nutrition at Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax, and is here to discuss the effects and impact of celiac disease. Dr. Morley holds a PhD in Community Rehabilitation and Disability Studies, Educational Research from the University of Calgary, an MA in Adult Education from UBC, a Bachelor of Applied Science in Human Nutrition from the University of Guelph, and a Documentary Film Certificate and Textile Arts Diploma from Capilano University. A long list there, Catherine. She is registered as a dietitian with the Nova Scotia Dietetic Association, is a fellow and life member of Dietitians of Canada, and a founding member of the World Critical Dietetics. Prior to joining Acadia, Catherine worked in hospitals and clinics advising individuals and families living with serious illness on optimizing food intake to enhance well-being and quality of life in public health, and as a consultant in the development and evaluation of national, provincial, and regional nutrition programs, and in dietetics education. Not only does Catherine have this lengthy curriculum vitae, an impressive one I might add, of nutrition and wellness, she lives with celiac disease herself. So welcome, Catherine, and many thanks for joining us this evening, and I will pass it over to you to take over.
Thanks, Una. I'm going to share my screen. And as I mentioned to Una before we began, there are some links embedded in this, and I'm not going to open them, but if you want a copy of, because they expand upon points that I'm making. So if you would like a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, you are very welcome to it. It's not top secret or anything like that. And I think that through the alumni office, you would be very readily able to, to get that. So we're going to talk about celiac disease tonight, and I'm going to figure out how to advance my slides with this new technology. As no, it's not new. Oh my goodness, I use this every day. As with Una, I'd like to acknowledge the land that we are on, Mi'kma'ki, here in Nova Scotia, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Here's the plan for this evening and what I will be talking about. So now I can't actually see the chat at this very moment, but please do put your questions in there, and then I'll be able to see them as we get to the let's talk portion of this. I'm going to preface all of this by saying I'm a registered dietitian. I am not a geneticist. I am not a physician. I'm not a immunologist. I'm none of those things. And so if you have technical questions about physiology and reading slides and all that sort of thing, that I'm not your person. But what I do know is how to manage celiac disease, both because I've studied it and don't teach it, and because I live with it. I will just mention that if you're a person really interested in the immunology of all of this, I can help direct you to where to read about that, but I'm not the person I certainly have no really anything beyond lay understanding of that. So I'm going to talk about what is celiac disease. Excuse me, a tiny bit of statistical information, because that's all there is on the incidence. What are the symptoms, the diagnosis, what's the treatment, and then but wait, there's more, because there is celiac disease, and then there are other gluten sensitivities, and I could not let this opportunity go by without mentioning that, because I think a vast number of people live with gluten sensitivities, and it's a pretty darn great idea for us to cover that, and then discussion and questions and so on. And if there's something that you know more about this particular topic than I do, I welcome you to share that with us, because that's how we all learn. So here is what is celiac disease. Now, this is not something I drew. This is a fantastic artist rendering, let's call it, of our intestinal villi. And I'd like you to think about this. If you see the picture there, that's on the left side of all these little bumpies that you see there are just like our tongues, just like what are they called on our tongues? Taste buds, we call them. I don't think that's what they really are, but that's what we call them. They line our whole intestinal tract, every single bit of it. So if you think about, what am I looking at here? You're looking at the surface of our intestinal tracts. So, okay, possibly not our stomachs, but once we get into the small bowel. And then you'll see that on the right-hand side is like the little railroad track of cells that are on top, are lining that are on the surface of the villi. So that's the little projectiles that stick out into our guts, and their little job is it's sort of like if you thought about oh, what are those things called? A rag mop. You remember the olden days they had, or they still sell them, with lots of cotton sticking out and to pick up dirt and grime and so on, and for many cases spread it around again. But villi don't do that. They absorb the nutrients that we have eaten through our food. So celiac disease is an autoimmune response to the presence of gluten. So one must consume it, and then all hecka breaks loose. So what happens is that, as you can see here in the picture, I hope you can see it. It probably is pretty tiny on your end, but you have this this inflammatory response that breaks out all of these little tiny cytokines, and they're like little tiny I don't know if you can see me at the same time that you can see the slides. Is that probably not? I'm going to say no. But what I'm making is little like oh, Pac-Man. If those of you who are old enough to remember the very, very early days of Pac-Man, and you had a little thing that looked like a tennis ball that opened and shut and ate things, right? So it's like little cytokines. That's what they're doing, is they're going out there and they're literally killing off the villi. So it flattens it right down. Now, back in the olden days when I was an undergraduate 40 years ago, what we were told is that the gluten lies on top of the villi, but that's not true. That's not what happens. It's just literally causing them to not be there. They flatten out, and if they're not there, they cannot absorb nutrients. So we get this what's called stunting of the villi, and then, of course, once we have decreased nutrient absorption, we have a whole host of problems that what's the word? That follow. That's the word I'm looking for. So what is gluten? Okay, so let me just go back to say that's what celiac disease technically is. That's what it's, an autoimmune response to the presence of gluten in our bodies, for those of us who are sensitive. So what is gluten? Well, look at this really great artist rendering of what gluten looks like. It's a disorganized collection of proteins. So gluten's a catch-all term for the proteins found in grasses that we eat as humans. So that's and not all of them, but in wheat, rye, and barley. And they all have different names: gliadin, glutenin in wheat, saccharin in rye, and hordein in barley. But look at how cool they look. And so you can, and what they're responsible for when we consume uh, when we use gluten containing flours in our in baking, is they make all that beautiful elasticity that traps air bubbles in our baked goods that make the, and then when you bite into that and you've got that wonderful chewiness, that's because of our dear friend gluten. So woe is me that I cannot eat gluten anymore, because you miss out on that whole fantastic experience. So that's taken away. And but the good news is there's a whole whack of other things, very technical term, a very huge whack of other things that can be eaten. So in essence, what the treatment there is avoiding foods that contain gluten. It's pretty simple, but pretty complicated at the same time. But when I came across this graphic, I went, oh my God, that looks like a party favor that you burst open and all this cool gluten falls out. So the incidence of this is interesting. The incidence of celiac disease, more common in people of Caucasian origin, is about, well, it used to be not even more than 3 or 4 years ago, 1 in 133 people in North America. And more recently, it's been like in the last few months, it's been 1 in 100 people. So that's a pretty significant reduction in the incidence, increase in the incidence. And that's probably because we get much better at testing. And I'm going to invite you to wait for but wait, there's more section, because there's some information about the incidence of of gluten sensitivity that's, for me, a little bit mind-boggling when I think about the implications. So symptoms of what all can go wrong. Well, the most common one that people experience is abdominal pain and all that can go wrong with your gut. So if you imagine the things that can go wrong with your gut, including nausea, vomiting, this is like, I won't apologize. This is like dietitians' everyday life. We talk about the gut and all the stuff that goes wrong with it, and people are somehow, they are very delighted when they finally get to talk to somebody about things like diarrhea and the color and consistency of their stools and so on. It's our everyday stuff. That's what we talk about. So it's everything that can go wrong. There's bloating. There's incredible gas from both ends. There's and then all kinds of variations upon stool consistency and color and smell. I wish you could see my face. I'm making a little screwed up face. As a result of that, and that's pure and simple what I described. The villi are flattened, absorption doesn't happen as much, and so you get, coming out of the gut, undigested or incompletely digested food. And that ultimately leads to malnutrition, which ultimately leads to the symptoms that we would feel. So often people report feeling very, very tired. No amount of sleep is going to help them. And that's 100% due to malnutrition. People experience, like when things are pretty far progressed, they've had a malabsorption of iron and vitamin C, so their iron status is very poor, and they're anemic, and that of course contributes also to the sense of fatigue. So there's a whole load of symptoms that come with pure and simple, we call it in our business, simple malnutrition. It's hardly simple, but the treatment is to feed somebody. So we're going to get to that in a couple of slides. Some other things that people have experienced, but not everybody experiences the same thing, is joint pain. So I know myself, before I learned I had celiac disease, like every joint hurt like heck. My hands, I thought I have very serious arthritis in my hands and my elbows and my hips and so on, and it all went away when I stopped eating gluten. So that's important. The brain function, so related to sleep, falling asleep or waking up once you've gone to sleep. cognition, the ability to find the right word. Although I think these days with COVID, we've all developed this kind of cognitive challenge of what's the word I'm trying to say. I don't know if any of you have that, but boy, amongst my family and friends, we are all experiencing that. I just can't find the right word. However, this is COVID aside, or isolating aside, it is a very common symptom that people experience that it goes away once they avoid gluten. And there's many, many more. And so what I've attached there, as you can see, is a link to the Celiac Canada and the very many symptoms that are considered atypical. So that's a bit of a joke or a ha ha ha, funny kind of thing, because often what we hear about is the abdominal pain. But what I hear from colleagues who are physicians is that those atypical symptoms, meaning reproductive challenges, what I'm mentioning about joint pain and neurological, are extremely common. So it's kind of odd that they're still called atypical when they're so common. All right, so there's that link to that. But everything that the links are to, I'm talking about. So it's just much more detail and a bit. Yeah, much more detail. So diagnosis is done in a number of ways. First, there's a blood test, which is just a little poke to test for IgA-TT, and that is anti-tissue that's spelled wrong, glutaminase antibodies. So we're looking for the existence of antibodies that would develop in the presence of gluten. I apologize for the spelling error there. Now, the challenge with that is that you often get false negatives. So it's not definitive by any stretch of the imagination. And then going on to a small bowel biopsy, and what of course the radiologists are looking for is the flattening of the villi to see if that happens. And both of those are fraught with challenges, because as I've put over there on the challenges, you can still get a negative test and still have some of the symptoms like the joint pain, and not have gastrointestinal symptoms, but have other related symptoms, and but your test can still come back negative. So that's frustrating. So it's pretty hard to get it sorted out, especially for those people who don't have the typical flattening of the villi. It gets a bit challenging. There is genetic testing that's more and more becoming acceptable. Not so much that I've observed, but it's becoming more and more looking for the oh gosh, I've forgotten the name of it, but excuse me, whatever the genetic testing is to show that a person holds those genes. Oh my goodness, that's the word I was looking for. Genetic testing, genes. Lordy. Anyway, so looking to see if a person has those genes, and if they don't have them, they don't have celiac disease. So that's newish and exciting, and it's not super duper new, but it's certainly much more reliable than the blood test or the small bowel biopsy. But the challenge is, as I've said there, these can be negative, and a person can still have symptoms when they consume gluten. So that's just, and the other thing I wanted to assure you is, research on celiac disease, it really only started in the late 50s, mid to late 1950s. So the amount of information we have about celiac disease, like on a genetic level or cellular level, is growing all the time. But I don't think your things really got seriously underway, gosh, long after I became a dietitian. So I'm going to say in the last 20, 30 years, things really, even the last 5, things have really taken off in terms of because we just don't understand this condition very well at all. So I'm pretty excited about what's going on right now and what we'll learn more about this disease. And of course, researchers are looking for, how do they turn off that gene? That would be great to figure. The same thing that's going on with diabetes. How do you fix that gene to make the condition not exist anymore? Right. So then we're going to go on to treatment. Well, it's 100% the avoidance of gluten, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this just because it's super important. So I've got a list there, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second, because not a second. I'm going to actually do it for several minutes so that you can see me. You can see me? Una, can you see me? I saw you for half a second fly by there.
Yes, we can see you.
Yeah. Okay, good. Hi. Avoidance of food. So I've already said wheat, rye, and barley. And then there are all the products made with that. So, think about, for me, who loves beer? I dearly love a really good beer made for the most part with wheat. So looking for beers that are made with millet, or isn't that funny? The first thing I talk about is beer. Oh, Lordy, that's terrible. Okay, millet or rice. They're very, very good beers. So anything that's made with wheat. So it's not like having a pizza or a sandwich made with flour, but the ingredient is in there. And so it contains gluten. There are many, many products that have, wheat starch or malt that comes from barley. Now, malt, okay, this is an important point. Malt is made from barley, just in sort of basic parlance. When we say malt, what we mean is malted barley. But malting is a process. So you can have malted rice, you can have malted quinoa that are gluten-free, and they're okay. So if you see malted rice or malted quinoa as opposed to malt, then you're good. It's okay. So all of the ingredients, I just happen to have a few foods here to show you. So for instance, this is a product called Good Thins. Some of you may have eaten them. They're quite delicious. And the ingredients are rice flour, vegetable oil, millet, poppy seeds, salt, mustard, flour, sesame seeds. So there's no gluten there at all. Now, here's a challenge, is that this says, and I hope you can see, where's the little thingy? Right here, certified gluten-free. Can you see that little thingy there? However,
Yeah.
nowhere on this package can you see certified by whom or what. So this is important. Versus if you look at, where was the product I found? Here we go. I also have here gluten-free Rice Krispies. They say they're gluten-free. It says right here, gluten-free in big letters here. However, there's no certification to prove that. So what I would recommend, okay, I trust this. Some people with celiac disease wouldn't. They wouldn't eat it, but I trust it. What I really value and appreciate is this little symbol right here that says certified gluten-free. And what that means, it's kind of like when we have, it's not kind of like, it's exactly the same. It's certified by the Canadian Celiac Association. This is a really nice product. It's President's Choice. They just came out with this not so long ago. It's pretty great. I used to mix my flours myself, a little wheat, a little millet, a little corn, and now it's all in a package, and they've dropped the price dramatically. So this is what I buy now for baking. However, it's the Celiac Association has a certification program that this little symbol then shows up on a package. Unlike this, right, that says it's gluten-free, but we don't know, like, how do we know that for sure? We don't. So they've had to undergo testing to ensure that it has less than the recognized parts per million. And I've had a little brain moment here where I can't, like, I know it's, anyway, I don't even want to say it, 200 parts per million is coming to mind. And Jennifer, you may know what the actual number is, so you could write that in the chat. Is it 20? Thank you, 20. So it's 20 in Canada, 20 parts per million, and 200 parts per million in the United States. So this has been tested and proven that that's indeed so. This is a claim, but we don't know if it's so. So this is an important point to think about. So one has to be very careful with label reading. All ingredients by law have to be included on all packages. And what was I going to say about that? You can't fake that. Like, that has to be for sure. These are the content. So anything that you might buy, let's say at a farmer's market that they claim to be gluten-free, I never eat that stuff because you just don't know. And also the other point about label reading is, even if I bought this product over and over and over again, I would still read the label every time I bought it to make sure that they haven't changed the composition, because that happens all the time too. So and I know that grocery shopping and label reading might seem like, gosh, that's going to take a long time, but you do get fast at it, right? So that's good. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. So complete avoidance of gluten, that's the treatment. And that's what it will be until it's figured out how to prevent gluten, or how to turn off the genetics. That doesn't turn off the genes. Here we go. I'm going to move on to contamination of gluten-free foods. So you go to all this effort to purchase gluten-free foods, and then lo and behold, there's a whack of ways, a whole number of ways for contamination to happen. Any surface that you might have for food, like a table or a countertop, crumbs, the existence of crumbs, or even microparticulate that we can't see of gluten. For some people who are extremely sensitive, I'm extremely sensitive, one little crumb would make me really ill. The utensils, so sometimes, if you think about, you have spoons that you use in cooking, and they're riveted together, so gluten can gather in that little tiny rivet. So depending on the sensibility of the person, it's not sensibility, the sensitivity of the person, a person will want to have their own gluten-free utensils. So I have in my kitchen my own measuring cups and measuring spoons, and then the gluten-containing flours have their own set of utensils. I have my own toaster. There's so many ways, and this pretty nice kitchen stewardship website, The Hidden Sources of Gluten, she's done a really fantastic job at where it could be hiding, things I never even thought about, like my cast iron pans. So the solution for that is, and I don't ever cook anything that, I guess I'm good. I don't ever cook anything in those that contain gluten, so that's a good thing. But you could oh gosh, what's that term when you not re-season your pans, but you know what I'm talking about, where you work on your pans and get them cleaned up and new again. That, I've forgotten the word, and I can't see the chat, so I apologize. But here's another thing that is the hardest thing. Not the hardest, but I put there, you have to be your own advocate. You have to be the eyes and ears of things when you're eating in public. So I can't tell you how many times I've been to potlucks, and I always bring a potluck main course and a potluck dessert, so that at least I'll know I'll have something to eat. And what I find is that things are just put together on a countertop or a table, with people reaching across with utensils and so on. So, I've had to say, let's create in a very nice way, but let's create a gluten-free space with its own utensils. Like you go to all this trouble to bake a gluten-free cheesecake, and then the pies are right behind it, so people are getting a piece of pie and carrying it over the cheesecake. Well, that just can't be, because it will be contaminated. So it's really, a person has to be really careful in eating in a community. Not to say you can't do it, absolutely you can do it, but just to be very careful. I've noticed caterers, especially the ones at Acadia, have worked really hard to be really clear, this is gluten-free and it's away from everything else. And I'm pretty thrilled that they've done that. So yeah, at the beginning, when I was first learned I had celiac disease, I was really very shy to say, oh, I need things to be gluten-free and safe. But I've gotten over that, because you only have to get sick so many times, and then you say, okay, it's not worth it. I'm going to be less shy about this. So here's the, but wait, there's more. So what I have learned about, and I think are pretty exciting discoveries that are happening at celiac research centers around, well, for the most part, they're the ones I've seen are well, that's not true. I've gone to conferences and there have been presenters from the United States, but of course there's all of Europe and Northern and Scandinavia and so on. So there are some really fabulous research centers that exist, and are coming up with some pretty interesting findings. So here are two. And this is the non-celiac gluten sensitivity, where people could have negative, the traditional tests are negative, but they still have symptoms. Or in either GI symptoms, gastrointestinal symptoms, or non-gastrointestinal symptoms. So this has been, so I think what that means is non-celiac gluten sensitivity. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. There's a whole bunch of conditions that exist that don't have a name yet. And whether they'll be named in my lifetime, I don't know. But what we do know is that if people avoid gluten, they don't exhibit the symptoms anymore. So that's pretty positive. And then celiac reflux is one of these things that, honest to goodness, when you Google celiac reflux, there's lots of research about it, but it does not appear on either the American or the Canadian Celiac Association websites. So I don't understand that, quite frankly, but I certainly know, as a person who lives with celiac reflux, if I eat, like I said, that one crumb, I have reflux all the time. So these are things to pay attention to, or if you know somebody who constantly has reflux and they've tried really hard to avoid coffee and tomatoes, and all the things they're told that might cause them to have acid reflux, it might be gluten. So just and here's why I think this is important to think about. Remember, I mentioned to you 1 in 100 people in North America have celiac disease. From a presentation from the Director of Research at the University of Chicago Celiac Disease Center, their estimation there was at the University of Chicago is 1 in 6 or 7 people has non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So look at how many there are of us here. And if it's 1 in 6 people, it's way more common than 1 in 100. So you'll remember, oh gosh, it must be coming up to 8-9 years ago, and it still continues a little bit. There was this gluten-free craze, and everybody seemed to be, not everybody, many people adopted a gluten-free diet, and so many people reported that they actually felt better. And this would be the explanation, because they may not have celiac disease, but they have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So we all know that the big impetus for that, the interest in that, was weight loss. It may or may not have resulted in weight loss, but for some folks, but anyway, people did feel better. And that's why, because the incidence of gluten sensitivity, that's not celiac disease. So there is no immunological response in the presence of gluten. It's a real thing. And so much is not known. And that's why I put there, so many questions remain. And it's one of the points of frustration, I suppose, for all dietitians, but also our students, going, well, wait a minute, what am I supposed to tell people? What are we supposed to advise people? And it's one of the many topics in nutrition that the findings are evolving literally every single day. So we have to keep on top of things. When I learned, I was 50 years old when I learned that I had celiac disease. When I was a student in the 70s, we were told this was a disease of children, that they were emaciated, and that's it. That's all we knew. And now we find out that that's not true. A person can develop celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity at any age, and latent celiac disease, such as the sort that I have, it doesn't show up till later in life. Yeah, those are things that we didn't know about in the 70s when I was a student. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now, and then I'll be able to see the chat, and also to invite you to share your thoughts and ideas and whatnot. Okay, I'm going to scroll back up to the chat here. Nancy Hendrigan. That's the best one for baking, isn't it? Glad the price is dropped. You know what, Nancy? I love this one, but I also like Bob's Red Mill. So the difference being this one contains xanthan. Now, I want to tell you, I forgot to tell you, oh my gosh, this is so important, about cookbooks. All right, so I've got, like, my desk is little, but it is chock-a-block full of stuff. So I have some cookbooks my kids bought me for a Christmas present way back when I was 50. And they're very well loved. So this one, Gems of Gluten-Free Baking, this was when before we had products like this. The different, okay, so and the one I love the most right now, I've been in love with this since I got it. It's called Gluten-Free on a Shoestring Baking Bread. If any of you have used this, you'll know what I mean. What I love about this is I love baking, but I get so upset when my gluten-free baking doesn't work out. So what I loved about this author, Nicole Hun, in the preface, she says, this is about chemistry, it's about temperature, it's about accuracy. If you're not prepared to test your oven, get a scale that measures in grams, don't bother. Don't even start. I've tested these. This is the way they work. Don't muck around with anything. And so I followed this. I changed my whole baking cupboard and set everything up. And lo and behold, it's fantastic. And one of the things she says, this is so brilliant. Okay, so this contains xanthan, which is a gum. So protein, as I said, is that beautiful elasticity. If you've baked with regular wheat flour, you just get this, it feels so good in your hands, and oh, it's just such a wonderful feeling. So Nicole Hun's idea is, if you put a gum in there like xanthan, you're going to get something gummy, but you've taken out the protein, you've taken out the gluten, so you have to put some protein in. So her suggestion is skim milk powder, or what's that other stuff? Oh, I have it in my cup. Buttermilk powder, something that's got some protein in it to replace the protein you took out. And then you have that, and you have the xanthan, and you get a way better product, because when the air bubbles form in your baked good, you've got some protein to give it structure. Do you like this is an air bubble. Yeah. So I love her books and her website. The other thing to be really clear about is, when you're looking for things, is that none of these, this is another really good one, gluten-free cookbook. So that's about making all kinds of things, not just baked goods. Once you realize that you aren't going to use pasta, then the sky's the limit. You can cook with whatever you want. But what's the challenge is all the sauces and soy sauce and garlic things and so on that we use that may have flour in the ingredients. So you just have to be really careful about that. But what I love about books, because most of the time I get recipes off the internet, but recipes on the internet do not have to be tested. This is a really, really critical thing. So a person can put together, and if you've ever taken a recipe off the internet and you cook it and you go, what the heck were they talking about? This is delicious. Because in their kitchen, I don't know like about you, but when I cook, yeah, there's the recipe and then there's what I do, really. They're not the same thing. So what I love about this is that these are tested. These are going to work, right? But as Nicole Hun says, if you're not going to do what I tell you, don't even start. Save yourself the trouble. So I like that. I appreciate that. So I would highly recommend those. This one, get me back to my point here, Nancy, this contains xanthan already. You don't have to add it. But there's another one, I think it's a Bob's Red Mill, and it does not contain xanthan. But I like its the flavor of it better, the Bob's Red Mill, than this, because this is more tapioca, potato, and corn flour. So the flavor is not as much as this fantastic Bob's Red Mill. So what I do is I mix them half and half, and then I just top up the xanthan a little bit, just to make sure that I'm going to get a gel. And the other thing about baked goods, not cakes and muffins and so on, but even bread that you purchase that's gluten-free, or gluten-free muffins, or not muffins, English muffins or bagels, you have to toast them. You have to, because what happens, the crumminess, like, I don't mean crumminess with no B, I mean with the B, crumbiness. The crumminess, it just kind of falls apart because it doesn't have that wonderful protein structure, unlike what Nicole says, which is add the protein back. So if you bake it, or if you toast it rather, it rehydrates the protein that is in there, so it makes it not fall apart. And our Matt McSweeney, who's our sensory scientist at Acadia, I've asked him, why does this work? And he said, that's why it rehydrates or regelatinizes, hydrates the gel, I think, maybe he said, but it only works once. So you can't take your toast, have it cool off and go, oh, darn it, I want to toast it up a bit more and get it, back to that delicious chewiness that you would get when you've got the gum reactivated. It doesn't work that way. Like one time, you got one time. So the benefits of working with a sensory scientist, Matt, can help me figure out what's actually going on in food chemistry. If you have any questions about food chemistry, Matt McSweeney is your guy. He's very good. Okay, to say that one is more, Roberta, 57 years old when you were diagnosed. Yeah, senior. Yeah, it's not a condition of babies. Absolutely not. To say that one is more sensitive than another, does that mean you can handle large amounts of gluten without causing damage, or is it that your body can handle a certain amount of damage without experiencing symptoms? Probably both, Rhiannon, probably both. I just know for me, like one little crumb will do it. And for me, my primary symptom is reflux, and it will happen immediately. So some people will find, they have to eat a piece of bread or a piece of pizza. Oh, I would never do that. Oh my gosh, the like one bite would just be enough to. And those of you who live with celiac disease, you'll know what I mean. It's just not worth it. It's not worth it at all. Yeah.
Before you go on to the next one, in regards to that, one of the questions I had is, what did your life look like before 50? So you said you were diagnosed at 50. Is it a continuum? Is it something that you sort of start on and then you become more insensitive? Or was it a fact that you just knew something was wrong, but you didn't know what it was and you were diagnosed at 50 and it's pretty much been the same all your life?
I'd lived with reflux, I'd say about 30 years. But I always thought, I don't know who's all here, I can't really tell from names, but for any of you who identify as a cis woman, you will know that our lives are pretty stressful. We juggle a lot. And I thought, and I'm a single parent doing a PhD, my kids were homeschooling, and I thought, oh Lord, there's nothing more stress-wise. Well, there probably would be lots more stress-wise that I'd have to deal with, but it was pretty stressful. And I thought, I just have reflux because I'm stressed, that's why. But, and then what happened is, my friend's daughter, who was a child, no, she wasn't a child at the time, she was 18 at the time, but since she was very small, she had debilitating reflux. Like she couldn't go to school. Her reflux was so bad. And so she was one of these people who had a negative blood test, a negative biopsy, and ultimately a pediatric gastroenterologist said, you have celiac reflux. And I went, what's that? And I was at their house of all times on Christmas Eve, when you have all the gluten that there is in the year in one night, right? You have all the lovely baked goods, you have the stuffing and the turkey and the gravy and all this incredible stuff. And I thought, I'm gonna die. This is just awful. It was unbearable. It was absolutely terrible. I couldn't sleep that night. And she had told me she said, you know what, Kathy, I stopped eating gluten. And it was like that. It was gone, like a light switch, like a switch. So I thought on Christmas Day, the next day when I was feeling so gross, I'm just like, what have I got to lose? Right? So I can live without shortbread for today, and I can live without a mincemeat tart just to feel better. And it was unbelievable, the difference. So yeah, so I'm not sure I answered your question there, Una, but I hope so.
Yeah, you absolutely did. And then Rhiannon, who asked that original question, just commented and said she's newly diagnosed at the age of 24 and still trying to figure out her threshold. So I suspect that's the case for everyone, whether it's celiac or non-gluten celiac sensitivity, non-celiac gluten sensitivity. It would be the same thing. It would be sort of figuring out the variables that come into play into your eating regimen, right?
Well, that's true. And Rhiannon, especially for you, here's the thing is once you actually nail being gluten-free, I call it being poisoned. That's my language. When I by some way, I don't know how I managed to consume some gluten. It could be a crumb left, on a cutting board. And I don't know. I'm usually fastidious about all of this, but you never know, right? I can the symptoms come back whammo 1,000 times worse than they ever were before. I don't know how many times I'm making that up, but you know what I mean? Like way, way worse than I ever had them before I stopped eating gluten. So I don't understand the physiology of that, but I've heard that from many people that, oh my gosh, once if I mistakenly, you go to a restaurant and they swear it's gluten-free and then you find out it actually wasn't and you're sick for 3 days and it's way worse than you were at the beginning. So that's something to know about. I see the question there, Una.
Yeah, I just wanna help with the chat and just catch us up. So we do have another guest who said that they were 33 after their second pregnancy.
Yeah.
They were diagnosed. Just on the recipes and the products that you were showing, we have that same person actually who said we love gluten-free on a shoestring pizza crust. So that's a good one to remember.
This is a great book. Yep.
And then Roberta asks, would you use bulk burn to get your ingredients?
I
That's
do
a
all
good
the time.
question.
I do all the time. And the reason why is I've had it, and I also see that there's a hand up, Darren, so we'll get to you. I do all the time, Roberta, and that's because I've checked in with them about what are your standards for doing this. So they have them all in one section of the store. They have, if you go there, you'll notice their little scoops have a little yellow tag usually around them, and they change them all the time, like way faster than the ones that are gluten containing ingredients. Yeah, I buy well, now I buy this because it's convenient. But in the days when I mixed up my own flours, I bought them all there. Yeah. Darren,
Uh,
yes, done.
so we have a question. We have a question from Kelly in the chat, and then we'll go to Darren and Jennifer who have raised their hands, if that's okay.
Yep.
So the question in the chat from Kelly says, "Thank you for the session. Very informative. I'm a third generation celiac and have been diagnosed for 20 plus years. I'm so sensitive now that I can't actually consume protein, poultry, pork, beef, farm fish, etc. Have you run into this at a dietitian level? Because of this, I have a very difficult time getting all the nutrients I need, as a lot of vitamin supplements contain animal protein and bone product. Any suggestions?"
Kelly, the suggestion would be that you and I should have a chat because so this is not related to celiac disease. This is a protein. I've forgotten the name of it, and again, Jennifer, if you remember the name of it, please put it in the chat so that we know. But it's and people toss around the term I have a meat allergy, and that's not true. Like it is a sensitivity to like it is the same kind of immune response to the presence of certain kinds of proteins, but not related to gluten. Because gluten's a plant, like gluten comes from plants, and meat proteins come from animals. So it is an allergy. It is it's an allergy. I do believe that's what I was reading about lately. Only because one of my kids has this. Not they have it, but their very best friend has this. I can't eat anything containing protein except I don't know. It's some no, like tofu. That's about it, and bean paste and so on. Beans, right? So it is a challenge. So Kelly, if you want to be in touch, let's have a chat. You're
We can
sorry.
certainly we can make that happen. We can connect you with Kelly.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. Oh my gosh. So a lot of vitamins and supplements contain animal protein and bone product. The bone product should be okay because that's calcium, magnesium, and not protein. However, yeah, like gosh, if they've got, it's frustrating, right? Because then you'd be paying top dollar for these pure vitamins. So again, you know, our friends at the Vitamin King or whatever they're called. I know there's a vitamin store in Wolfville. I forget what they're called. The name Vitamin King just like kills me. Supplement King, yeah. You know, those, you know, like this is what I need. I need this kind of supplement, so go find it for me. And then I would also say, because I have been absolutely astounded at, like I take ranitidine, which is an acid. Ooh, reduces acid production. I was buying that over the counter, and I got a prescription for it. So you know, you could very well have your vitamins and supplements prescribed as well, so that you're paying the dispensing fee only.